So here we go. I'll give this a bit of a roughen up, and you'll be able to see the surface change colours. See the stripe that occurs here after you've roughened it up with the sandpaper. You only have to do half of it because we're not going to glue the other half. I mean, in terms, you don't have to do right round because this side's going to be glued to the wing. That side's just going to have the foam sitting on it. It won't actually have to be glued. So all you have to do is half of it. But of course, do the whole length because it's going to slip inside the wing completely. And I think this is I don't say to do this on the instructions, but I think it's a pretty important part of the build because glue always sticks better to a surface that has been roughened up. It keys to the surface, as we call it. And if it's a smooth surface, it might just peel off. Get a bit of rough on the surface there, and it will actually lock into the grooves you're creating with the sandpaper. I'll be covering this more when I do my video on glue, and the best glues to use and the best gluing techniques. But suffice to say that for this video, here we go, for this video, you really want to sand it up. Other side's fine, one side's got a whole lot of sanding on it. And it will go this way, sanded side to the top of the wing when we put the glue on. Now, one thing I didn't mention yet, actually I should have mentioned before I showed you where that servo goes, is that test your servos. Don't assume that they'll all work straight out of the bag because most of them will, but every now and then you'll get a dud servo from new, and it's no good having gone to all the trouble of gluing it into the wing and setting all the linkages up only to find, oh my goodness, this servo's no good, I have to rip it out. They'll really pay you off if your new model starts off with being half disassembled again just to replace a faulty servo. So plug in all your servos. Check that they all move smoothly and they haven't got broken gears or haven't been dudded out of the box. Do that. Absolutely essential. Check all 4 of the servos before you put them in the model. I should also remind you, although I just spoke about it, these ailerons, look, they're really, really stiff because the hinge line here hasn't been exercised. And as I say, you can see the hinge is made simply by cutting a V into the foam. So you have to exercise that aileron, as we did with the elevator and the rudder, so that it's free enough to move smoothly when the servo's pushing on it. Otherwise, the servo won't be able to bend it nearly enough. In fact, I've seen these where people haven't exercised it, and it's only this part of the wing that moves because the end there won't move. The hinge is too stiff and the horn is just here. So it stops, it just actually twists the aileron instead of moving it up and down. Again, you can go almost to 90 degrees and give it a really good wiggle a couple of dozen times through that whole range to get it all freed up, because you do need a lot of aileron throw on the AXN. It's not that responsive to aileron, so if you don't get the throw, it's going to be much harder to fly it. You want to get those nice and free. Now I think that's free enough. See, now I can move it with my finger. Moves very nicely. And you do the same to the other one so that you end up with 2 nice, see, this one won't move with my finger. That's stiff as beans. And if I try and move it here, notice how where are we? Notice how the aileron actually twists. It doesn't move at this end. It's just going to twist. So if I just put this on the plane, hooked up the servo, you'd have twisty ailerons, and the bit that aileron that does all the work is this bit, and it's not going to be moving at all. So exercise those ailerons, get the hinges freed up. Do it now. And as I say, they will split. Eventually the foam fatigues and it'll split, but you can put some tape on it and put some hot glue on it and it'll stay on. I haven't lost one yet. A couple of dozen flicks. And eventually, look at that, nice. And if I look at it from here, you can see the whole aileron now moves, it doesn't twist. As with the tail section that we glued on before, you want to dry fit these wings to make sure they actually fit into the model before you start getting the glue out. It's no good gluing everything, putting glue on everything and then finding, oh no, it won't fit together, what am I going to do? So get both your wings and dry fit them into the fuselage. And they should go in. There we go. And you'll see that there's a little bit of space here. It gives you an idea. You can see there's a kind of a fillet here. And that, I'll try and get the right angle. It's a bit hard because the model gets in the way now. You can see they don't go right up. That fillet almost comes up to the fuselage side, not quite. And you'll feel when they're snugly in together. And of course at this stage we've just dry glued it. We don't have the tube in and we don't have any glue. So they're going to be real flexy. But one thing I'll show you that you can do is even at this stage, the tube will actually slide in here. So there we go, there's the tube. I pushed it in even once the wings are in place, so you can do that. And now of course the next step is to put the wings into the fuselage. Well, maybe not, because we've got some soldering to do in here. We've got to put that speed control on. Let's leave the wings until we've done some of the electrical work. Let's take our speed controller, cut open the bag. This is a brand new one. Also, sometimes it doesn't hurt to test these either, because nothing is guaranteed to be perfect out of the box when you're buying low priced equipment. And as I say, this is the Hobby King 30 amp controller I've chosen. Now these motors only draw a maximum of about 18 or 20 amps, but it's nice to have a little bit of reserve, and a 30 amp controller gives you that reserve. Either the Super Simple Series 2530 or the Blue Series 30 amp will give you heaps of performance and a good safety margin for those hot days, or when you're doing a lot of full throttle operation. It's not going to blow up on you. And so this one comes with quite a long thing. The UBEC, important thing with these models, absolutely essential, is that the UBEC is at least 3 amps. I don't know if we can see that on here. See, BEC, 5 volts, 3 amps. If you get a 2 amp speed controller with a 2 amp BEC, then you're really running on the ragged edge of safety. It may shut down, because if you're moving all the servos at once, which you might do when you're really throwing them around, and then you're toast, because everything will start oscillating and moving and you'll lose control. So 3 amp BEC, or you can use that separate UBEC, but that's just extra work wiring it in. So I'd recommend you get a speed controller with a 3 amp BEC. Now we've got to fit this to the model. You'll notice we have some wires here from the motor. They're already installed. If you buy this version, it's got the motor installed, the wires run down here, but we've got to solder our speed controller onto those wires, and we've also got to put a connector on here, because these controllers don't come with a connector. Now I happen to have, if you're using the Hobby King batteries, excuse me while I reach deep into the bowels of the box I've got down here. If you're using, reaches even further, if you're going to use these batteries, these Hobby King sourced batteries, or any battery, you've got to have a connector with the same type. Now these come with an XT60, and I still prefer to use the Dean's connector, but for this video most people are using XT60s, and well, that's the wrong gender. Just as well I got it out, I need to get a male to go in there. So we'll need a male connector that matches that we can solder on to the end of this. So let's get our soldering iron out and our heat shrink and connect up the electrics. To do a half pie decent soldering job, you're going to need some soldering. Lead-based solder is far superior to the lead-free solders that the hippies will try and sell you, and the environmentalists. Lead won't hurt you unless you breathe in acres of this stuff. It's not going to send you crazy, send you mad. It's going to do a much better job at soldering. You'll need that connector that I spoke of, and that's the one I had before. This is the one I need on my ESC. It's the male. It's got the pins. The reason we have male on the ESC is because these exposed pins could cause a short if they're on the battery. So on the battery we have female, so they're not going to bang on something and set yourself on fire. You're going to also need a soldering iron. Now this is a little bit light, but I'm pretty good at soldering. I've done it for years. Normally you'd want one that's a little bit bigger tip, and this is only a 30 or 40 watt. Something like a 60 or a 70 watt iron will give you a much better result if you're beginning. Need some side cutters, because you're going to have to trim bits and pieces, and you'll need some heat shrink. And to be honest, the cheapest place I've found for heat shrink is Hobby King and some of the other Chinese online stores. They sell the heat shrink for nearly giveaway prices. So if you're ordering stuff and you've got a bit of weight left from Hobby King, just throw in some heat shrink. It's not that expensive, it's not that heavy. You can fill up your trolley with it, and you'll never be short of things to use it for. So here we go. I've got red and black, but I've run out of thin black, so I'm going to use red for some of the stuff. First thing to do is you do the easy stuff first. So putting this on here is easy, because it means we haven't got this hooked up to the plane yet. We can do this with plenty of freedom to move around, and we're not going to be trying to pull stuff out of the model. So first thing to note, of course, is the polarity on these connectors. You see it's got a little minus on one side, and on the other side it has a little plus, so that we know which way round to wire this. It's quite important. So we'll take a bit of red heat shrink, and I usually use about 15 millimeters. That's 3/4 of an inch to you Americans. A little bit of red, a little bit of black, for obvious reasons. You get the right size heat shrink depending on the wires, and this shrinks to about half its size, a bit under half its size, so it should be a fairly loose fit on the wires like this. And don't forget to put the heat shrink on first, because nothing worse than soldering up your connection and then finding you forgot to put the heat shrink on, because you've got to unsolder it, put the heat shrink on later. Now one thing I've found is that these wires usually have lead-free solder on them, and that's terrible because it doesn't melt very well at all. It's rubbish. So first thing I do is I put more solder on here, because we want to get some lead into the equation. The lead-free, as I said, is for hippies. So, and you need 3 hands, but being an expert at this, I have 3 hands. You just can't see the other one, and I'll just tin that up a bit more. Notice my iron's nice and hot, very essential for doing this kind of stuff. Even a low watt iron, if it's hot enough, will make life easier. Okay, so I've put a lot more extra solder on there, which will make it easier to do the soldering. Now the connector I've used before, so it already has some solder in it. Otherwise you'd tin that a little bit. Put a little bit of solder in there so it's easy to solder up. Now what I'm going to do is, for no real reason at all, I'm going to put on the positive lead first. And this is where we do what we call sweating together. We put the two bits together, they've both got solder on them, and then we apply a bit of heat and the solder should run together and it should all be soldered. I'll just take my glasses off to do this because I have to take my glasses off to look closely. I'm old and my eyesight's not as good as it once was. Applying some heat. Voila. Let it cool. Don't want to move it till the solder's completely cooled. There we go. That's pretty damn good. That'll do the trick. I'm modestly happy with that. Yeah. And you do the same with the other side, which will be the negative. Because everything's tinned up, it's got a bit of solder on it. Just put the two bits together, apply heat, and all the solder will melt. And the wires will be joined to the connector. It's almost like magic. And once you've done it a few times, it's actually really, really simple. But if there's a demand, I'll show people how to do the soldering because it should be that quick and easy. It shouldn't take you hours and overheating things. It should be just 3 or 4 seconds maximum of heat on the two parts and everything should be soldered together, ready to go, like this. Now you can move your heat shrink up, slide it over like this. And if you've got a hot air gun, heat gun, blow on there, it'll all shrink up, or you can just use the barrel of your soldering iron. That'll do a similar sort of a job. I'll let you use the hot air gun later to shrink those up. But there we go. Now we have the XT60 connector on our speed controller. All we have to do now is hook our speed controller up to the wires from the motor. To do that job, we're going to have to use some more heat shrink so they don't rub together and short out, and a slightly smaller diameter heat shrink. As I said, I don't have any black left in this diameter, so I'm just going to cut, and this is a little bit longer, maybe 20 millimeters this time, because you're covering up a join in 2 wires, and you want to allow a little bit of overlap so that if you don't get the heat shrink right smack on the middle of the join, it's not going to slide off and cause a short circuit later. So there we go, we have 3 pieces of heat shrink, all the same length. And now we have to do what we did before, because these wires here that come off the motor are probably tinned with lead-free solder, and it's a horrible stuff to use. So we've got to dilute it with a bit of leaded solder, 60-40 rosin cord electrical solder, like this, with my 3-handed approach. There we go, and I'm all shaky today because it's been a long day and I'm tired. Now, I can't remember which one I just did, so I'll do them all again. Here we go. I might cut this bit out because it looks terrible because I'm so shaky, because I'm old and decrepit. It's the red one. Just do the black one. I think I did the black one, but I'll do it again. There we go. Remember, when you're soldering, which you'll find out when I do a video on the whole subject, you heat the wire and put the solder onto the wire. You don't just heat the solder directly, or you end up with a dog's breakfast and it doesn't actually solder properly. So apply heat to the wire and then solder to the wire on the other side, and then it'll all flow nicely. There we go. Now again, we've got our speed control. It's got pre-tinned ends, but we tin them again because we don't like that horrible lead-free solder. And this wire is quite thick, okay? So if you've got a soldering iron that's too small, it won't solder. If you find suddenly your solder's not melting, then your soldering iron is too small, and you'll need to get a soldering iron that has more wattage. As I say, this is about a 30 watt iron, and it's working quite well on here because it's actually a very hot 30 watt iron, and I've done this many times before, so I can do it really quickly. If you find you're lingering and it's getting cold and the solder's sticking and the iron's sticking, go and shout yourself a new soldering iron and you'll be much happier for it. Again, put your heat shrink on before you solder, or you will get so annoyed at yourself that you have to do it again. Rightio. This video is going to be a lot longer than I'd hoped because I'm probably explaining in way too much detail for most people how to do this. And remember, if you're not really up to soldering, you can buy the plug and play version, but you know, I don't think it's as good. You don't end up with as good a model in the end, but it's better than having no AXN at all, I'll tell you that. Here we go. Now the colours, you notice, red, black and blue. Most of the time, if you solder black to black, red to red, blue to blue, it works right, but sometimes it won't work right. But the beauty of these controllers, the blue one, is you can reverse the motor rotation without having to change or resolder your wires. And if we have to reverse it, I'll show you how to do that. But now I'll use my 3 hands again, and I'll just join these wires together. And I shall probably speed it up on the video so you don't have to spend hours watching me stuff it up. Now once you've soldered those wires on, you can run the heat shrink down over the joins so they don't short out for the next phase, which is basically testing that your controller is all wired up properly. And as I say, if you've got the blue controller, you don't have to worry about if it's connected up the right way around, because you can reverse it in the programming. But if you've got a cheaper controller or one that doesn't support reversing through the software, then you don't want to shrink your heat shrink yet, because you may have to unsolder it if the motor runs backwards. But in this case, it's not a problem. We can change it around later. But I'm going to plug the battery in, put a receiver on, and see if it actually works. Right, for the purpose of this, I'm just using the little FreeSky because, as I say, I'm building this for somebody else. They're using the Turnigy system, but I have to use a receiver that I can connect to, and I don't have my standard Turnigy transmitter here, so I'm using my FreeSky. But all you have to do, remember, plug in your receiver to the UBEC, well, I'm sorry, to the ESC channel 3, and then when your transmitter's on, when you plug this in, we should get the beeps. Wait for it. There we go, so that it's initialized, and let's get my transmitter so we can, here we go, and it is indeed turning. Which way? Is it the right way? Yes, it's turning the right way. I can tell because if you hold the propeller near the motor, you'll be able to feel if it's turning the correct way. And this one is turning the right way, so we're all set. The wiring is perfect. I'll heat shrink up everything, and we'll move on to the next step. Here is my battered old heat gun, and as you can see, I've got the battery connection here. I'll just give that a bit of a blast. And you'll see now, if I hold this up to the camera, that the heat shrink has shrunk down, and it provides stress relief for the wires and also stops any chance of a short circuit in the back there. What I have to do now is the same with the leads that go off to the ESC, making sure I've got that heat shrink pretty much over the middle, so it's not likely any end is going to poke out. Just do them one by one, and we should be right. Get it lined up. Try not to melt the model when you're doing this. It's not a good look to end up with a melted plane while you're shrinking your heat shrink, because the foam will melt very easily. So you can use your soldering iron, use the barrel of the soldering iron, that'll do a good job too. Just it's quicker with the heat gun. Only takes a few seconds of heat and you're done. Here we go, she's done. What we're going to do now is we're going to fit, I'll just get this rubbish out of the way so you can see it's nice and clear on the bench. I'm going to fit the control horns for the elevator and the rudder. And one important thing to be very careful of here as I fish these out of the bag of accessories, that's where you'll find them. One very important thing to be aware of is that you have the wire inserted on the control horn before you put the horn on. Otherwise, if you put the horn on, you'll never get the wire in the hole because it won't bend enough. So we'll start with the rudder horn. I think these horns are all the same size, so it doesn't matter. You can use any one in any position. Just verify that for you. I've never really checked, to be totally honest. Although I'm sure it would have, Murphy's Law would have meant I would have stuffed it up if you could change them around. There you go. All 4 horns, they're all identical, so it doesn't matter where you put them. And you'll notice when you look closely at the rudder, on one side there's quite a divot. If I can get the lighting angle correct here, you can see there's a divot in the side of the foam there. Where are we? That's a bit better, is it? Yes. And that matches the retaining plate on the horn. That's this little plate down, whoops, this little plate here fits into that divot. So that tells you, it's just a double way of checking that you get it on the right side. Of course, the wire, here's the wire for the push rod for the rudder. So obviously the horn has to be on the same side as the rudder push rod. So remember, first thing, important point, pay attention. Put the horn on the rudder first. Now, remember, once you put it on, you can't change the hole. So which hole will you put it on? Well, I like lots of authority on my controls, so I tend to put it at least on the second one, maybe on the inside one, depending on how aerobatic and how controllable you want your plane to be. So on this one, because it's for Graham, who's just learning, I'm going to put it in the middle hole. So we can tone down the throws with the radio if we need to, but he's not going to need full deflection on the rudder while he's learning. So put it on the wire, and one thing to check is whether you put it on the top or the bottom. I would put it on the bottom. So just makes the throw of the push rod a little straighter. So we turn that over, and then we put it on the bottom, which means we'll have to go which way? It's to go this way. You're watching carefully here. It's all very careful. I can find the hole with my bad eyesight. There we go. So, and I put this on here temporarily. This hole's already in the rudder. It makes it nice and easy. It slides through there beautifully. See how that push rod then lines up on the minimum amount of angle? If I put it on the top, the push rod would have to be up higher. So this is going to reduce the friction in the push rod system. And there we go. There it is on the second hole, or the middle hole. And all we have to do now is push this little cap on the other side to lock it in place. As I say, you've got to put it on the wire before you put this cap on, otherwise you will never get the wire on. These have a little barb system on them. So you slide the little plate over the prongs that come through and push it. You'll hear it click as you push it on, as the little barbs engage on the plate. Give it a good push, make sure it's nicely engaged. It should compress the foam a bit. Here we go. That's it. That's the rudder linkage all hooked up. Same goes for our elevator. Flip it upside down. We do the same thing. Make sure that push rod's nice and smooth to start with, just in case you've got glue or something on it. In fact, I did get a little bit of glue on there, just as well I checked that. When I was gluing the tail surface on, some glue might have sneaked through the cracks, and it's left a bit of remainder on there. So we get that off before we put the horn on, or we'll never get this push rod out far enough to remove that glue, and that's better, that will impinge on our free moving control surface. So there we go, you've got to do that. Procedure with the elevator is just the same as with the rudder. I tend to run my elevator again on the middle horn if you don't need the aerobatics, but if you want the aerobatics, you probably want it on the inside horn. I'll do Graham's on the middle one because he's not really up to aerobatics at this stage. And again, you might need to take a look, see which side. The horn, it comes out one side a little bit more than the other, so I'm just going to set it on the side which will give us the least bend in the push rod once it's all installed. And here we go. There we are, that's looking pretty good, as you can see. That push rod's nice and straight. If I'd put it around the other way, it might have had a bit of a kink to one side. So here we go, and everything moves smoothly, as it should. Beautiful. And now we can put the little cap on the top to hold it all in place. You can check at this end, just make sure you pull on the push rods, everything moves. That's beautiful. So where's the cap for that one? It's in the plastic bag of accessories. Hunt it out, because it's always right down the bottom. Here we go. And as with the other one, pop it on, press it, you'll feel it click across the barbs, and then you're done. Again, compress the foam up a bit. If you don't have this on tight enough, then you might get a little bit of slop in there, and that's not really good. So that's absolutely beautiful. And what I'll do now is put the servos in this end. On the ends of the pushrod wires that are already installed into the model, you'll find these little posts. You have to take them off before you actually install them on the servo, and there's one of the posts there. You need a servo arm, and I use the one-sided arm from the Hobby King 10 gram servos. That's just about the right length. And of course this has to go in the end of the arm, but of course the hole in there is too small. You'll have to drill that out so that this will thread in there. As it comes standard, the little bolt on the end there, the little threaded piece is way too big to go in the tiny little holes on the arms. So you're going to have to run a drill through there. So you've got big enough hole to fit this in. What size hole, I hear you asking? Well, let's have a look and see. I've got my dial calipers here, which are nicely zeroed. Put that on here. It's a 2mm bolt. If you live in America, tough cheese. You have to find the closest thing to 2mm that you can get, because I know you're all still Imperial, but that's about 2mm for that. So you need a 2mm drill. I think I've got one of those not too far away from here. So take your trusty electric cordless drill and your 2mm drill bit, your little horn, and drill the second hole out from the end, so you're not too close to the end. If you drill the end one, you might break through and then it won't be very good. So you can do this freehand, you don't have to put it on a bench and do it. There we go. That then should provide enough clearance for this little bolt to fit in, and by jingoes, it does too. Look at that. So there you go. Got to drill your arms out to 2 millimeters, sorry. Second hole from the end. See that? That's what you have to do in order for it to accept these little posts. Of course, once you've drilled that hole, you have to do it in both servo arms. Fit the little post on, and then the little screws, a tiny little screw, I won't do this up close because it's hard enough for me to see as it is. Little screw goes on the bottom, a little nut I should say goes on the bottom there, and you don't want to do that up too tight because this has to swivel. This has to swivel, so you don't want it up tight. You want to use a bit of Loctite. Use a bit of blue Loctite because it's removable Loctite. If I ever need to take that off, I can do. And generally speaking, I just back it off a little bit. One drop is all it takes. Hope I'm doing this in shot, my hands aren't too shaky. You don't want to get it actually on the, there we go. One drop of Loctite on the thing, back it up a couple of turns and then back it down like that. And then that will stick and won't come off. It's important these posts don't come off because if they do, your plane will likely crash.